So yeah, Thames 21 is an environmental charity all about rivers and canals. And if a river is polluted in some way, then that's, for me, a big problem. We have a right to healthy rivers, we have a right to clean water, so anything that's jeopardising that, immediately we're going to go after. And in London, we have exactly that. We have a significant and massive failure under the very broad criteria of the Water Framework Directive. And across the country, it's not that much better, but it's particularly acute in London. And it's evident just from walking around from the rivers that I visit and investigate. You don't have to walk very far. And you have large signs like this in places like a public park in Haringey telling people to stay out of what should be something they have a right to enjoy, whatever age you are. And it's coming from a variety of sources. This is a constant problem in not just London's rivers, but across the country, that results in the what's called the first flush of pollution. So this is coming off our roads, a variety of roads here going into different rivers. It's the hydrocarbons, all the stuff that's coming off brake pads, off tyres, and drips of oil and petrol coming out of the cars. And despite supposedly cars being a lot cleaner than they were, it all depends on how often they're serviced and also the volume that you have. All cars leak to a degree, and if you have 2.5 private vehicles, as you do in London, plus all the other forms of transport, it all ends up on the roads. And I saw some figures the other day that were talking about the billions of gallons globally of oil that's being wasted out of our cars, which of course kind of leads us to then exploit more and more rare forms of hydrocarbons around the world, causing other forms of pollution. So our inefficiency is born by our rivers, and the problem there after particular weather events is it ends up killing large amounts of fish and invertebrates and other aquatic creatures. So as well as poisoning our water supply and costing even more money to clean that up. So it's a kind of a nonsense system, but it's designed exactly like this. This is working at maximum efficiency, really. So this is a kind of a testament to our sort of the madness in our design, sadly. Misconnections, or where you might have a home or a property that has connected its wastewater appliances or toilets either unknowingly or negligently to a pipe, a guttering or a drain pipe that's meant to be just for rainwater, is a big problem in London and around the country. I see it separate to the kind of pollution that comes off roads. I don't think it's very helpful to combine them all into a description as diffuse urban pollution. One, it's a lot of jargon in one sentence, but also you lose sight of the causes and the reasons for this pollution happening. I don't think that makes it effective in terms of coming up with ways to tackle them. We see some parts of London where it's in excess of 10% of properties that are either allowing their raw sewage in terms of excrement or dishwasher, washing machine wastewater to go straight into rivers, which is pretty disgusting. By putting the water on the surface, by getting it out of the pipes, that is a fantastic indicator of how healthy our urban water cycle is, and it makes it much easier to detect. Unfortunately, too many places the pollution comes out at the end of a pipe, and it's almost too late then. And it also kind of detaches the responsibility for the problem away from those residents who should be interested in caring about that. So you'd have the peculiar situation where people who care a lot about rivers have no idea that they're polluting the river that's within a 200-metre walk of where they live. And then when they find out, they're astounded that this can happen. But that information is rarely out there, so we don't empower people to make that kind of choice, which again is a weakness in the way that we're dealing with these problems. So all of that and seeing this evidence and doing the water quality tests to prove that these rivers were polluted, we needed a way of getting people to understand there was a problem. Because people care about rivers. When people are surveyed, the vast majority say that the worst kind of pollution is river pollution. It's the archetypal kind of pipe spewing out orange goo or something. People don't want to see that kind of stuff. So they're going to want to see action to stop that. So if they don't have the information, they don't know there's a problem, then they're again deprived of that kind of democratic right to call for better and improved environments, which, as I say, we have a right to. So the Love the League campaign was our public vehicle for working with people. It started off very grassroots, and it was about getting an understanding of people's perception of the urban water cycle and their part within it, and developing resources that sort of made that easier. Some of that is working with illustrators who do children's books and coming up with graphics and designs that just make it much more immediate. You can go online and click onto various websites which talk about things like Misconnections and the urban water cycle, or the water cycle, and they're pretty impenetrable. A lot of the kind of the water cycle things show us sort of an idyllic mountain with rain falling on it. It turns into a little river, it goes past maybe a few schematic kind of sewage works, and then comes out into the sea. So that makes people think that, you know, the water cycle is out there in wherever that mountain might be, I don't know, Middle Earth or Snowdonia or something, when in fact it's, you know, where they live, it's their street, their roof or their road is part of that urban water cycle. So we aim to give them that understanding of that. And then it was giving people the tools to prove that their rivers were sick, that their rivers were unhealthy, and that's where we brought citizen science in. And that meant that people who had rivers in their parks that they knew were polluted, you could see if a river is healthy or unhealthy, then had the science, the hard science, to go to their council and say, this river's sick, something needs to be done about it. We have a responsibility, all of us, if not just because it's the human thing to do, but under things like the Water Framework Directive. So with that in mind, that then meant that we could start to apply pressure, if only through sort of emphasising the fact that there was a problem. And one of the solutions, people say, well, you know, it's you know, depressing, hearing about all the bad things that are happening to rivers. How can we make things better? And sustainable urban drainage systems are a very big part of that. It creates, obviously, a buffer between the pollution source and the lake, the pond, the river, or the canal, and we wouldn't have been able to get to a stage where we were able to have that conversation if we didn't have the science and the proof that the rivers were polluted. So when people say, well, what's the solution? We could say green drainage or natural drainage or SuDS. It made it much easier for people to understand. So we'd say, well, yeah, this pollution that's going in the river, it could go through a reed bed, or it could go through a little grassy basin, and then people would get it immediately. The problem we had, if we just went in with this sort of, you know, we need SuDS in this area, people wouldn't have any idea what on earth a SuDS was. And it kind of takes the real passion and drive and need for defending our environment out of that narrative and that dialogue with people. We turn it to a very technical discussion. In terms of SuDS working, then the evidence is pretty clear. We're monitoring all the SuDS that we create. This was research that was been mentioned at the Lamb Drove site up in Cambourne, and it was a sort of a semi-retrofit, semi-new build development for this SuDS system, and its effect and benefit to the environment is shown on the blue. And close by, they took water samples off the streets that had no SuDS, that were going straight into the drains and then down to the local stream. And you can see in orange there's a much bigger, much larger amount of copper, zinc, and lead and chromium going into those receiving waters. So the evidence is clear that SuDS do improve water quality. Again, petrochemical oils and burnt hydrocarbons, minimal amounts coming out of the SuDS, much higher amounts coming out of the areas off the streets where cars are parked and all that kind of stuff. It's not oil that's being dumped. This is just the natural kind of drips that come off cars. And one of the reasons why there's such a drastic and stark difference is because the bacteria in the natural environment within the SuDS will consume hydrocarbons. Petrol, for much of it, is a natural set of chemicals and molecules. It's historic, prehistoric shellfish and all the rest of it. So it can get broken down and turned into its basic compounds. So with all this in mind, we thought what we have to do in London, because there's no effective or comprehensive approach to sustainable drainage in terms of water quality to this day, we thought we had to show that it could be done. So these weren't pilot projects. These were aimed to be demonstration projects to be replicated across London. So we're in the early part of that phase. We've got a chunk of money from DEFRA, We chose, in consultation with London Borough of Enfield and the Environment Agency, the Salmons Brook, which is sort of a little bit south of the M25 in northeast London. And it flows west to east, pretty much, through a range of communities and areas. And we wouldn't have got to this stage if we hadn't involved people and made them understand the problem that was out there. If we'd have just sort of said, hey, we want some money to do some SuDS, I think the scheme would have failed, because it's not, if you say to people, you know, we want to improve things for water quality, that's kind of a meaningless statement. We want to make rivers healthier. You know, so you had to have meaning in the reason for doing it. And once we had that, the council reasonably and sensibly recognised what we were saying couldn't be ignored, and if they had ignored it, it would have perhaps been a bit of a risk, and they fully embraced the kind of whole agenda. So I would say that London Borough Enfield is the Portland of London. And the Environment Agency provided a lot of assistance in making that happen. Scoping the locations, we kind of made that a bit of a X factor kind of thing. We said to people, who wants these, rather than saying we want to put them here. And so we had a limited amount of money and sites, and that made it have a sort of a cachet, I suppose. Grosvenor Park was the first site. A traditional historic park, very landscaped, lots of the roads drain into the local park, pond and lake and river. Working very closely with Robert Bray Associates, we got designs made. So the two dotted lines coming up from the bottom are the course of the old pipes that would have gone straight into the culverted river. So they were removed in these plans, and some swales or shallow ditches created. And at the same time, the council got money to take the river out of its underground chamber and restore it to the surface. So on the right-hand side, you have this new river that had been hidden away, and obviously the SuDS on the left preventing pollution getting into it. So that's the perfect combination of river restoration, and I don't think really you can have sustainable river restoration without SuDS. And the little posters are sort of the temporary signs we put up at a public exhibition, if you like, show around the SuDS systems, around the swales, just to give people that understanding. And it's a series of winding shallow ditches, these swales that have been planted, and increasingly they will start to process more and more pollution. At the moment they're providing some attenuation, which again protects the river from big surges. But at the moment they're at their most kind of raw. The more vegetation you have, the more effective it's going to be in terms of holding water and treating pollution. And the final part of the system will be the trees that were either dead or sycamores we had cleared out so we could get more light in there, open up this area, create new habitats, and the bridge is under there the final bit of water will go into the river, which into Grosvenor Stream. And the success of the project has been that we've kind of used it always as a multiplier to get more money in. So we got another chunk of money from Thames Water, and that will be to create the permanent signage, but we'll do that with the local people, so they fully embrace and accept and help design those signs themselves. So while it might mean that the design times are a bit longer, I think the future preservation of those SuDS will be enhanced because you have local people who will want to look after them, as opposed to them have to be done by contractors, which can be done by as well, of course. The Glenbrook, that's top left, a load of kind of oily deposits, sort of like cooking oil, and bottom right is sewage fungus growing on the riverbed. So again, with Robert Bray Associates, these are the more detailed designs. We're going to take the river out of its channel and through a series of basins of quite decent size. That's one of them before it got planted. And again, get the people who really cared about the river to come in and plant them up. And that is beneficial for many, many reasons. And it's also good fun. So you kind of, I think there's not enough fun and SuDS combined. You need to have more of that. If it remains a sort of technical discipline, then it's excluding unnecessarily a lot of people. And you give people that narrative. They know the plants they put in there, they know when they were in, they get an understanding, they become experts in their local water catchment. One of the big problems was because there's so much paving, 22 times the size of Hyde Park, it's been paved over in London in the last generation. When it rained, we would get an incredible surge of water coming down into the river, which would strip out the gravel that we had put in front of these sort of weirs here. So that meant we had to adapt and amend the way we put it together. The company we used, Maidencroft, had 2 people on site for the whole time the project was going on, and that meant they built up an expertise as well. So they saw these storm events occurring and were able to respond to it in kind of almost real time and feed that information back to us, back to the designers, back to the council. So it became incredibly robust as a way of developing these SuDS. And if they'd have gone in and built them within 2 weeks and then left, and they would have had a major, or not even a major, but a significant rain event, all of that stuff would have been ripped out potentially, and we'd have been left having to scramble and get people back and pay large amounts of money to get back on site rather than responding on site. And it saw the need to sort of strengthen certain areas, because it's very much a bespoke system. We're creating a wet woodland habitat, a sort of a post-glacial landscape, if you like, but in the 21st century. So it's going to need fine-tuning. And just to show you on the left-hand side, as the water comes downstream from the right, the diverter weir will send it into the basin at the top of that picture on the left-hand side, and where it'll get processed in time as the vegetation flourishes. And we've been able to add, with the insight of Robert Ray Associates, stepping stones and things like that. So we've created a very different landscape, and that wasn't the intention in terms of one of the outcomes of the project. We never pitched that as one of the reasons we were doing it. It's all about the river quality and our right to clean water. So all these other benefits people kind of discover for themselves rather than us having to push them in their faces and say, look at all the wonderful things we've done for you. People can just explore the landscape without coming to some kind of narrative. The fact that they planted in September, August and September, and now it's still very warm, has only helped in terms of plants establishing. And again, another unexpected benefit has been that the river itself is functioning much more like a natural river. So we're having the creation, the establishment of gravel banks, which will change depending on the amount of water that's flowing down. So it's a place that looks like a river, that feels like a river, that people want to protect because it is a river, as opposed to a concrete channel. And this stuff is still coming down. This was just a couple of weeks ago. This is pollution from goodness knows where, houses, roads, who knows what. But without that would be going straight into the lake where all the fish live, where people go angling, where people want to walk by, and killing the fish, turning it into a stinking lake that might get an algal bloom like Grosvenor Park did 2 years ago. So now we have a life support system in the way that also is a place where people can spend time and appreciate their river. Thank you.
Hello, Theo. George Warren from Hammersmith and Fulham. Just a quick question. With all the combined sewer networks we have across London, and do you think that water quality is quite often forgotten about because we're all just chucking it straight into the sewer and we believe that, well, compared to the sewage, it doesn't really matter? Do you think there's a lot more that could be done with surface water?
Yeah. And even in areas where you've got combined sewage systems, if you're preventing pollutants getting into what, even in bigger storm events, those combined sewage systems are still going to go into the river. Even with the Thames tunnel, there's still going to be overflow events into the Thames. So the more pollutants you keep away from that, out of our environment, trapped in SuDS, the better. It's only the most central Victorian parts of London that have a combined system. If you go to Enfield, a lot of Haringey, Waltham Forest, Ealing, Richmond, they're all separate systems. So it's at least a 50-50, and I would say there is a feeble amount of awareness of how polluted our rivers are by our outfall drains from either roads or other shopping centres, car parks, that kind of thing.
Hello, Victoria Lemon Anglian Water. The SuDS, how much pollution can they take? Is there a point where they can't take any more? Or are they just going to be there for forever, happily taking all these things?
They should be there forever. They will deal with, the priority for us is that first flush of pollution for the systems that we've got. If you have prolonged and chronic amounts of pollution coming into a river, then I'd say that something needs to be done about that. And unfortunately, not enough is done about that. So we don't want our SuDS to be sewage treatment works. We want them to be a protective layer, an extension of the natural environment, which unfortunately with rivers we've reduced to a concrete channel. So they shouldn't be dealing with excessive pollution because that shouldn't be going into rivers. But in terms of what they do take out, in terms of the heavy metals, that will be caught there. And then if it does build up over time, then you could just excavate it and sell it to people, and they could extract the platinum and make rings out of it. So I think they will last as long as people want them to. If people did neglect them and didn't care for them and ignore them, then like anything, it would reduce in its sort of effectiveness. But in the way that a woodland will be self-perpetuating, there's no reason why SuDS won't be with a little bit of care.